Technical competence. If you ask a junior, this is probably the only thing that they are worried about. But in truth, this is just one out of the 5 pillars that are absolutely pivotal when it comes to landing your software engineering job. So then, what are the other 4 pillars? And in what ways can they really help your career? Welcome back to another episode of Becoming a Software Engineer. Think about a junior that just recently joined a team, right? Maybe this junior says, hey, I've got a lot of imposter syndrome. And it almost always is referring to the fact that this person is feeling weakness when it comes to their coding, their ability to finish a ticket, their technical competence, so to speak. And that's pretty interesting because only do you see this happen frequently for juniors. Right? If somebody was an engineering manager, for example, and if this person was being, promoted to a director position for the first time, they are going from managing ICs to managing managers. And that is a brand new thing. And as you jump into that, there are many people who feel imposter syndrome. And it's totally not for technical competence reasons. So there's something innately interesting about when a junior feels that their imposter syndrome is tied to their technical competence, because they're not just judging their technical competence as weak or fragile. They're actually also thinking that the other pillars in their life, in their career, is fairly good, or at least as compared to technical competence. So let's actually talk about those different pillars, because from what I have seen so far, I wouldn't say that everybody was really great with them. And I have actually seen other people who are good with the other pillars and pretty good, with the technical competence pillar, but not quite there, and still did extremely well in their organization. So let's just talk about that for a second. There are 5 pillars that I will identify that are extremely important for your dev career. The first one is attitude. The second one is professionalism. Third is mindset. Fourth is teamwork. And the last one is technical competence. And I'll go into each of them a little bit in detail. And yes, some of them might converge, there might be a little bit of overlap, but it is important to talk about each of them. All right, so I've got attitude with 4 bullets under it: positive, appreciative, curious, and humble. So let's talk about each one of them. So think of an intern who has been working on a piece of code for a while, ran into an error or a bug and just can't seem to fix the error. Okay, great. How does this person end up behaving, going forward? Is this person still remaining positive, or is this person emanating a lot of negativity? Right? I think that's a really big thing. If you lose your positivity and you're simply frustrated, it is very hard for the helper to disassociate that frustration that they're feeling with positivity, right? And so you could be giving a great experience to the person that is helping you, or you can be giving a bad one. So let's be cognizant of what experience you're giving to the person who's helping you. The second thing that we talked about under attitude was appreciative, right? I think this is a really interesting one. So a lot of times there are folks that ask for help, and once they are given some level of direction, they investigate a little bit more. The direction helps them, and then they're able to finish their ticket. There's no follow-up. And I think this is not a good habit. I'm not saying that everyone would be offended, per se, but I'm talking about what is the best thing that you can do as a junior. I think you should follow up. I think you should appreciate the fact that somebody else was probably in the middle of fixing some really deep bug of their own. And they stopped that and they thought to themselves, hey, maybe I can help by guiding them towards the direction of A, B, or C. And maybe you do either A, B, or C, and maybe you get your solution. I think it's good to follow up and say, hey, I tried B and it worked. Or, hey, I tried A, B, and C and it didn't work, but it did give me an idea of trying D, and that one did work, right? And so saying thank you so much for your time. And by the way, giving closure by saying, and by the way, this thing did work. So that was really cool, right? Giving that kind of appreciative note is such a big deal when it comes to the helper feeling great about helping. The third bullet that we talked about was curiosity, right? And this is something we talked about in the previous episode. You want to stay curious, right? You don't want to stay in the zone of fear. So when somebody's helping you, sure, you did work hard and, things didn't really go your way. However, if you're curious when they are giving you suggestions, you will find it curious and it will show. Whereas if you're frustrated and you just want somebody to partake in the frustration, it'll almost sound like you don't want to find your solution. And this is the exact opposite of who you want to be like. The last bullet that we talked about was humility, aka being humble, right? So if you're a humble person, it's very hard for you to even develop negative emotions in the first place. So what do we mean by that? Well, if you're a humble person, it's very easy for you to imagine that there must be somebody smarter than you who worked longer than you to crack this nut and couldn't crack the nut and probably has a better attitude than you in terms of, approaching something that they can't crack. And as soon as you're humble enough to conjure up a person in your mind who is actually like this, you have something that you can live up to, right? You can look up to this person and look forward in terms of you becoming more like this person, right? And it all starts with a lot of humility, right? For you to think to yourself, you know what? I really want to stay humble. I want to imagine that there's, much stronger people in this world who have tried and failed and had a better attitude. And when you start adopting that, everything starts working out in your favor. All right, so pillar number two is professionalism. So for professionalism, I have two bullets. One is reliability, and the other one is consistency. So reliability is when you do what you say you will do, right? When you say that you will finish by a certain time and you do finish by that time, right? When you say you're going to be awesome and you indeed are awesome, right? So that's what reliability is. And consistency is, instead of being reliable once and instead of being reliable twice, you're just always reliable, right? So you want to make sure that you're not just awesome, but you're consistently awesome. You're not just coming on time once or twice, but you're consistently coming on time, right? And so professionalism is really predictability, if you think about it, right? I need to be able to know that when I have a team that has, a makeup of person A, B, and C, what can I get with this team? Because I plan around what I can build, right? It's not as simple as, hey, look at these items, I'm going to prioritize them. When in theory, if I can't do any of them, what good is the priority? So a lot of times we actually have to look at what can we do with this team. And judging based on what we can do with the team, it influences actually what our priorities should be, right? Because the grouping, the package of items that we get to complete is very much dependent on the team dynamic. And you really want to make sure that the last thing you want to put on the minds of somebody who's trying to strategically win their way forward is to worry about the predictability or the professionalism of yourself or your team. All right, and then the third pillar is mindset. And mindset really is a little different from attitude, right? It's not necessarily something to do with how you feel or you make somebody feel. It's got a little bit more to do with, your core, who you are, and whatnot. Like, what is the predisposition of this person? So I've got 4 bullets here. Driven, has initiative, has high ownership, and has a growth mindset. So, driven, I mean, this one, the thing about mindset is that mindsets can change, but it definitely feels like it's really hard to change the mindset. For example, if somebody's not driven, how do you convince the person to be driven, right? And so if you're looking for a driven person, usually you're just going to look for a person who's already signaling the fact that they are driven, right? You're not going to try to change the person into a driven person. If you're going to do about an hour or two and then stand up and say, hey, that was awesome, right? It's very different from a person who's very driven and says, no, I'm going to do some more because I've got a specific goal, right? And it's very hard to know, how would you make somebody driven? And so usually what we do is we just choose people that are driven. And that's what I see happening around me a lot. Right? Do you have initiative, right? Maybe you see a problem that others don't see. Do you take it upon yourself or not, right? Do you have high ownership? Ownership would mean that you don't just want to own your ticket, but you want to own the purpose of your ticket, right? Are you trying to get done what the ticket wants to get done, right? Surely we're not doing these tickets as an end in itself. It's a means to an end. We're trying to do them to achieve something else. So sometimes in the process of doing the ticket, we realize that we actually have to do something else also to achieve the purpose of the ticket. And the question is, do we pretend like we don't know, or do we own the entirety of the outcome? Right? This is when Marty Kagan would say that the whole outcome-based approach is the most important, right? Not worrying about how much input you put in, and not even worrying about the output, the fact that you're finished the ticket per se, but the outcome. Are you trying to be a person that is owning the actual aftermath, the outcome of that particular ticket? And then you have growth mindset. And really, we talked about growth versus fixed mindset in the previous episode. So I would point to, episode number 3, where we definitely talked quite a bit about that. It's extremely important that you believe that you can grow, because if you're not growing and yet salaries are going up, well, that kind of sucks for an employer that wants to get a person on the team who is growing and wants to grow with the person, right? You want a company that's growing, you want a person that's growing. Right. And so if you have a growth mindset, well, that's step number 1 in terms of, building a team where every single component in the team is growing, and also collectively the team itself, the company, is also growing. The 4th pillar is teamwork. Okay, so for teamwork, I've got 3 bullets: leadership, communication, and collaboration. Leadership is interesting, right? Because leadership at an extremely high level, right? If we're watching a movie, right, with somebody who's like a leader of thousands of people, right? It's rather easy to conceive of leadership in those situations, right? And it's harder to conceive of leadership when it comes to something like interns or whatnot. But actually, I have seen many times, interns that had so much leadership in them, and interns that really did not have leadership in them. You can see it, straight from the get-go, right? Those who have leadership would, not only would they do a good job, so they've got a lot of competence, but they would bring the other interns that are having a hard time into the fold, and they would help them. They would carry them into some level of success, right? They would make them feel belonged. And they would achieve things, it goes a little bit into the driven, the point that I made about being driven. But they would achieve things, and then they would go beyond what they're achieving. They would actually help, the full-time engineers to, get some other objective done, right? And so there's all this aspect of, I'm going to do the best job possible in terms of being a leader, which is almost like a role that you're playing, but also displaying leadership, right? Where you may not even have the explicit role as a leader yet, but it is possible still for you to be displaying some of these leadership traits, or at least signaling, possibility of you being a leader in the future, right? Communication is a huge thing, right? In an interview, for example, if you can't communicate what you're doing with your code, it's going to be incredibly hard for you to be hired in the end, right? So as you communicate, not only do you want to, make a person feel better as opposed to worse, and make a person understand as opposed to get confused, but you also want to make sure that you're doing enough communication. You're not necessarily waiting for them to ask you a question after being confused for hours, right? Another piece of communication after you join the team would be that you are always staying in communication, right? So maybe you have an asynchronous work environment, but I would still say that it's really good to be the person who's extremely responsive, extremely communicative, right? I had a great manager who once said to me that in a remote working context, it's almost impossible to be over communicating, right? And so you definitely want to be making sure that you are communicating with your team. And the last point that I have for teamwork is collaboration. You're not actually coding by yourself. A lot of times you're actually coding together with other people. In fact, I would go so far as to say that some of the most important things out there is going to require the collaboration of other people. Are you a person where if you're on the right idea, can you convince other people of that idea? Can you get people on board? Can you get buy-in, right? This is all kind of part of, have you been a good teammate, right? Because if I give a great idea to a person who's been a bad teammate, it's rather hard for that person to get people on board. And most of the times, people don't realize, but programming is a team sport. You have to get it done together with many people. Rarely do you have a team of one when it comes to programming, right? And so teamwork is absolutely crucial in terms of collaboration, right? Without collaborating, you're basically saying that you're going to do things by yourself. And the most important things in software is done together. If you can't do things together because of the way that you were behaving all along, then that is a big part of the reason why you're not an effective engineer, right? And so it's incredibly important to be extremely collaborative. So every single pillar that I talked about so far, attitude, professionalism, mindset, teamwork, are entirely different from that last pillar that we already understand, which is technical competence. So, I'll talk a little bit about technical competence. Under that, I have 3 bullets: problem-solving ability, technical knowledge, and ability to learn independently. Problem-solving ability. I think this is also something that actually a lot of folks get wrong. While a lot of folks are working on the coding itself, usually in the real world, when you're given a ticket, that ticket is going to be so random that you're almost guaranteed as a junior that you don't know how to do your ticket. In fact, it's probably going to be that way week after week after week. So then the question is, can you investigate? And can you find out what the problem is, what the solutions are, and what the appropriate solution selection should be, right? So there's a certain amount of research, there's a certain amount of investigation that needs to be done. And there's a certain amount of faith that you're going to be able to do something far beyond just kind of memorizing some of the frameworks and then using them. You're going to need to be able to take something very random and then solve it for the end value, right? So if you have a random bug, can you solve it, right? If you need to use an entirely different language for something, or a piece of technology that you've never used before because it matches the current situation and the constraints that you have, can you use that? Well, that's all based off of your ability to learn, right? Can you problem solve? can you investigate, right? So that's a big deal. And then you have technical knowledge. That's the piece that everybody knows. Literally, it's the one thing in the many that we talked about today, right? Do you know how to code, right? Do you know some of the technical stuff? And the final thing is ability to learn independently. I think this is an extremely important thing, right? Your team needs to have faith in the fact that you're capable of learning things independently. It ties in very closely to the idea of having faith in the fact that you are a good problem solver. And if your team has a lot of faith in the idea that you can learn independently, then when you can't learn independently, which wouldn't actually happen often, the team would also be racing to help you because they know that, for all intents and purposes, when this person says they need help, it means they really do need help. In fact, it means that everyone else they know on this planet would have needed help, right? And so if they feel that way about you, if your teammates feel that you are generally a person who is capable of learning independently, then it's going to go a really, really long way when you truly do need help one day. I guarantee you that it isn't actually the most technical person who is always being hired. These other factors, people are looking at them. And why? Because people are hiring people. They're not hiring robots, and they want to work with awesome people. So remember these pillars: attitude, professionalism, mindset, teamwork, and then technical competence. Thanks for listening in to Becoming a Software Engineer.